How many of you like this picture? So this week, I received an invitation to a limited attendance conference in Atlanta. There's only 100 spots available. And it was at the Porsche Experience. And it's a ministry conference to be more like Jesus. I don't read anywhere in the New Testament where Jesus had a donkey named Porsche, okay? I'm not even sure his sandals were Porsche. The tickets, in case any of you want to send me, they're $1,000 a piece, and it's for one day. And the other pictures that came with this are guys in suits, which I'm pretty sure that within the first 15, 16 seconds of being there, I would distinguish myself as the guy on the bottom of the rung. And I know it's easy to throw rocks at this kind of stuff. I get that. But I want to ask you something, and this fits with what we're going to talk about today. What part of this screams servant leadership, giving away of yourself? I love Jesus more than anything else, and I want to lead a church, and I want to lead a ministry to the feet of the cross, and I want to take up my cross and follow Jesus. Anybody getting that from this? Okay. Anybody familiar with the recent kerfluffle with the John Lindell and Mark Driscoll? There was a men's conference. And there's a big deal right now in church circles, and especially in the Assemblies of God movement and things like that. And not throwing stones at those guys at all. I'm really kind of throwing stones at the leadership, in that they had a guy who climbed a pole, which was kind of weird. But not insanely weird compared to, like, you remember the power team that they would blow up the water bottles, and they're big muscle guys, and people break rocks on their chest, and then they would give an invitation at the end, come to Jesus, and sometimes that worked, right? And so you have this conference, and they have this guy climbing a pole, and he swallows a sword, and then he comes down the pole, and the sword's only like that far off the ground, and it's because he's coming down upside down. I mean, this guy's got some athletic ability. Well, Mark Driscoll, who's no stranger to controversy, comes out on the stage, and instead of giving his talk, he rebukes the leadership in this conference and says, "What are you doing? You know, this looks too much like some other things in our society that aren't that great. And it looks too worldly, and the spirit of Jezebel's here," that's the language he used, all that kind of stuff. And it kind of felt like Driscoll was saying, our dumpster fire here just got a little too hot. Because they started the whole thing with, like, they spent a lot of money on monster trucks and pyrotechnics and all those kind of things. Now, here's the thing. We can throw that stone at ourselves, too. We spend a lot of money, time, energy on but I mean, we can see when this is over the top. Are we exalting Jesus, or are we exalting shiny things? Okay? That's kind of where we're headed today. So, an easy question. Have you ever gotten distracted? Anybody in here ever gotten distracted? Okay, I mean, the answer is obvious, yes. How about this? You ever get distracted by something shiny? Now, for the purposes of our shiny question, I know we have some very tangible things up there, but shiny could mean a lot of things. Shiny can be more of a concept than a quality, can't it? Can't it? That's Indiana speak. Shiny can be more of a concept, because there's lots of things that are shiny to us, right? Power, influence, things like that. Sometimes anger. All right. So you ever get distracted by something shiny? Even if you can't think about that as a concept instead of a quality, I bet we can figure out that yes, we've all been distracted or are currently distracted by something shiny. How about this more uncomfortable question? Have you ever been distracted away from something good, or away from something noble or pure or right, by something shiny? Like, here's the right thing over here, there's the shiny thing over here. Anybody else? Okay. All right, we're tracking together. This is awesome. Now, since we're in church, let's get even more uncomfortable. How about that? Have you ever been distracted away from God by something shiny? All right. So what are the results? What is the result of being so distracted by something or someone or some whatever that was shiny? It was enough to capture your attention that it took you away from God. What's the result of that? What an introduction, right? I think it's going to make sense before we're all done today in a really positive way. So you just have to stay tuned until the end, okay? So don't get distracted, okay, before the end. I need to apologize here too. So your prayers, some of your prayers have been answered in that the doctors this week took me off of blood pressure medicine. Yeah, so actually I think God took me off of blood pressure medicines and the doctor just kind of confirmed it because my blood pressure has been doing really good. And what I've noticed is, over the last 3 days especially, I'm not nearly as foggy-brained, which is great for me, but you guys might want to be a little nervous. Because this thing seems to be clicking on all cylinders, maybe too many cylinders, all right? So just bear with me as we move forward. We're going to jump right in today, Acts chapter 12. We got to finish up Peter's deliverance story from last week. So he was delivered out of prison by God through an angel. He shows up at the door of the house where the church was meeting, and they've been praying that he be released. And then there's this whole funny scene where the girl, Rhoda, she goes to the door, and she's so excited, and she leaves Peter outside, and she goes into the other people. She's like, Peter's back at the door. He's out, you know, he's right here. And they're like, we're busy praying for his release. Leave us alone. That can't be him. And it's like, what? And he's standing outside the door. Okay, so they let him in finally, and he tells them, hey, report this to James, the half-brother of Jesus, and then Peter disappears into the night. We don't see him again for a few years. Now, Acts chapter 12, what happens next? Acts chapter 12, I think it's about page 1710 in your pew Bibles or thereabouts. Depends on which pew Bible you have, but it should be in that range. This is God's Word. This is life. We're going to open it together. Acts chapter 12. Verse 18. This is after Peter's escaped and all that. Now when day came, there was no small disturbance among the soldiers as to what could have become of Peter. You think? Right? Verse 19, and when Herod had searched for him and had not found him, he examined the guards and ordered that they be led away to execution. Then Herod goes on holiday. He went down from Judea to Caesarea and was spending time there. Now here's the thing, Herod wasn't messing around. We don't know if all the 16 guards that he had assigned to guard Peter were killed or just the 4 that were on shift when it happened, but definitely not a great day to be one of Herod's guards. And then Herod goes down to Caesarea. This would be Caesarea Maritima, and it was the rich and powerful place to go. And we don't know how long Herod was there exactly, but not very long. Verse 20, now he was very angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and with one accord they came to him, and having won over Blastus, the king's chamberlain, they were asking for peace because their country was fed by the king's country. So in other words, Tyre and Sidon are these places along the coast, and Judea is the place where they're getting food. Now remember, our intermission here of Acts chapter 12 is in the middle of a story that began at the end of Acts 11, where a prophet predicted a worldwide famine. And so this is consistent with the continuation of that story. Now Tyre and Sidon had, at various points throughout history, been really important cities. They were and are a part of biblical prophecy. Jesus had visited these cities. He'd healed people there. Ezekiel, if you want some background on Tyre and Sidon and what was in store for them and what had been happening to them over time, you can read Ezekiel chapters 26 through 28. Tyre and Sidon were kind of shiny places. They were important places. The Phoenician people were from there, and Phoenicia has this connotation with the color purple, and that's because of the shells, the mollusks there. They would make purple dye from that. So they were known as kind of the purple people. I don't know if they had any one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eaters around, but that would have fit prophecy as well, at least in my brain, my 8-year-old brain. Okay, so Tyre and Sidon, that's where there's this rub between Herod and these two countries. Now, if you're these two countries and that's where you get your food, this is kind of an important thing to get fixed up. So this Blastus guy, which if you're looking for a name for a child, Blastus, great name. This Blastus dude is, he's like a chief of staff. So think about it that way. So they're cozying up to the chief of staff so that the food doesn't get cut off. Verse 21, and on an appointed day, Herod, having put on his royal apparel, keep that in mind, took his seat on the rostrum and began delivering an address to them. Okay, now here's what's really cool, all right? It's really awesome that we actually know what this appointed day was. According to the Jewish historian Josephus from the first century, there was a gathering, the Games of Caesarea, in honor of the Roman emperor. And if you know your history, the Roman emperors at this time, Caligula, Claudius, those guys, they weren't the most stable fellas in the world. That's who Herod hangs out with in the rich and famous group. And they're all friends of our illustrious Herod Agrippa I. Anyway, Herod gets up to make the speech. And according to Josephus, who gives us a little more detail of the whole scene, he's wearing this bright silver garment, and it catches the sun's rays. And so basically, Herod is glowing. Okay? Verse 22, and the people kept crying out, the voice of a God and not of a man. Verse 23, and immediately an angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and died. It's recorded by Josephus that Herod Agrippa lived for another 5 days in agony before he died. So that's not inconsistent. Luke just puts this story all together in one kind of synopsis kind of thing. Josephus actually expands it out. Now, sometimes we get so familiar with the Bible that we lose a sense of sheer awe that these ancient writings are even preserved. I mean, isn't that amazing that we still have this? And so I'm about to read from a guy who didn't write Bible, but I actually got goosebumps with this when I was researching because God allowed this writing to be preserved, and it corroborates what Luke writes. I know I can be a bit of a nerd like that, so bear with my nerdiness. But I want to let's take a deep breath for just a second and appreciate how wonderful our God is that He would allow this stuff to be preserved so that we could actually see it, and know Him better because of it. Okay, so from Josephus, Jewish first century historian. Now when Agrippa had reigned 3 years over all Judea, he came to the city, Caesarea, which was formerly called Strato's Tower, and there he exhibited shows in honor of Caesar, upon his being informed that there was a certain festival celebrated to make vows for his safety. At which festival a great multitude was gotten together of the principal persons, and such as were of dignity through his province. Okay, what's that mean? The really important folks showed up, right? The rich and famous. On the second day of which shows he put on a garment made wholly of silver and of a contexture truly wonderful. This is Josephus, right? He likes Herod. And came into the theater early in the morning. So we even know when the speech happened. Early in the morning, at which time the silver of his garment, being illuminated by the fresh reflection of the sun's rays upon it, shone out after a surprising manner, and was so resplendent as to spread a horror over those that looked intently upon him. And presently his flatterers cried out, one from one place and another from another, though not for his good, that he was a god. And they added, be thou merciful to us, for although we have hitherto referenced thee only as a man, yet shall we henceforth only as superior to mortal nature. Which is very consistent with what Luke writes, right? Upon this, the king did neither rebuke them nor reject their impious flattery. But as he presently afterward looked up, he saw an owl sitting on a certain rope over his head, and immediately understood that this bird was the messenger of ill tidings, as it had once been the messenger of good tidings to him, and fell into the deepest sorrow. A severe pain also arose in his belly and began in a most violent manner, and when he had been quite worn out by the pain in his belly for 5 days, he departed this life. Okay, so a little more backstory. Once upon a time, Herod was caught saying how nice it would be when Tiberius died so that Caligula could be emperor. Rome was a political and moral mess at this point, and it would take a few weeks to unpack if we were to unpack all the intrigue and junk that was going on then, the backstabbing and stuff. But anyway, so he gets caught saying this, and Caligula, when he became ruler, when Tiberius did die, had given Herod rule over some of the old Jewish territory. And then when Caligula is assassinated in 41 AD, Herod helps a guy named Claudius become emperor in Rome. So even though Herod was a puppet king of Rome, Herod had a lot of influence. And Claudius rewards Herod with making him ruler over the remaining Judean lands. And that's that 3 years' time. So it's at this festival that Herod gets real shiny in his silver clothes, and he idolizes himself, and the people idolize him too. Shiny things can be really distracted, especially when you're hungry, right? Like the people of Tyre and Sidon were. And for Herod, it became deadly. So why did I start today with questions about distractions? Well, for one thing, from all outward appearances, Herod Agrippa I, this is going to surprise you because of the things we've already learned about him, was a religious man. Some people in their writings even would have called him a devoutly religious man. He kept the Jewish feasts. That's why he wouldn't kill Peter during the feast days. Think about that for a second. I've got a guy who says he follows God. He's a Jew. I'm Jewish. I'm in charge. There's feast days coming up. I'm going to kill him. But I probably better wait till the feasts are over. I don't want to do anything wrong. Does that make sense? But that's how Herod's religion went. You see, it was always in second place to his shinies. So he observed Jewish law when it suited him. And Josephus, history had different rules back then. You could be really kind to somebody in the way that you wrote your history about somebody. And so Josephus displays a great amount of first century Jewish bias. And he himself was a Jew. And he described this Herod guy as kind and devout. And with respect to his death, there's more writings by Josephus that said that Herod was repentant, and that he even rebuked those people that called him a god. Now, we don't have that recorded in the New Testament, right? So I'm not sure about that part. But this whole episode starts with Herod trying to gain, maintain, and grow his influence in the Judean region. He'd only ruled the whole territory for 3 years, and had only ruled it all for a total of 7 years by the time he died. So he seizes upon the common enemy, uses his religious connection, makes friends of the influential religious group, the Jews. So while he's religious, he's also this guy that hangs out with the Roman rich and famous, and he's ultimately and completely distracted by all kinds of things, but mostly himself. There's a technical term, a Greek word for this whole deal. This is the part where I get really nerdy, okay? So bear with me. Apotheosis. Sounds like something you'd get with a slight cough, right? Got a bad case of apotheosis. That's not what it is, though. Apotheosis. Now, apotheosis is the elevation of a person to a divine status. So as Luke recorded, the voice of a God and not a man. As Josephus records, be thou merciful to us, for although we have hitherto referenced thee only as a man, yet shall we henceforth only as superior to mortal nature. Now, when I was researching this whole scene, and that word, apotheosis, come up, my ornery self likes to ask questions in my head of the research. So you might say, I'm talking to myself. So I'm asking questions of the text. So I have this ongoing conversation going on in my head while I'm preparing the message. And on this, it goes something like this. Those primitive people, believing in mythology and kooky stuff and emperors and all that kind of stuff. We would never do that today, would we? And then, as I'm doing my Google search, I see this entry. The apotheosis of Washington. Now, before you think I'm going to get political, I might get a little, not really political, okay? Because as I've said before, I'm of the grumpy party. I don't like any of it, okay? But the apotheosis of Washington. So if I get political, I won't get partisan. Fair enough? Okay. The apotheosis of Washington is a painting by Constantino Brumidi. It was painted in 1865, and it's in the ceiling of the rotunda of the United States Capitol. It features George Washington decked out in classic Roman conquering purple, being elevated to the clouds in divine status, flanked by Lady Freedom and Lady Victory. And then there's these vignettes surrounding these central figures showing a weird mashup of Greco-Roman mythology and what was current events in 1865 as well. Anybody know what was going on in 1865? Civil War, right? So there's these 13 female angels, for lack of a better word, that encircle Washington, and they each have stars on their heads. You notice that some of them are turned away. So the 13, what would the 13 represent? 13 colonies, right? We're in the middle of the Civil War. Why would some of them be turned away? Because some of them turned away, right? Okay, and then there's these scenes, and it gets a little freaky, all right? Just below Washington is Columbia, the female personification of the United States, with her shield and cape and sword and eagle, which kind of looks like a Captain America thing in 1865, which I think is kind of cool. But there she is, and she's snuffing out tyranny, ironically symbolized by, well, a red cape. She's got a red cape too. Interesting, right? All right, so you got the red capes and all that. Interesting fun fact, this painting, again, painted while the Civil War is still going on. So one of the faces of the people Columbia has her foot on is none other than Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederate States. Okay, interesting, right? And then we have Neptune, god of the sea, with one of the ironclad warships of the time. I don't know if you can see it very well. It's right back there in that corner. You see it just a little bit, okay? So there's your ironclad warship from the time of 1865. And Venus, the goddess of love, she's right there. I promise I'm not trying to get X-rated here this morning, but that's just the painting, okay? And there's Venus. And she's helping lay the transatlantic telegraph wire, which was being laid in the ocean at the time of the painting. Then we have the Roman goddess of wisdom, Minerva. And she's keeping good company with Benjamin Franklin and Samuel Morse and Robert Fulton, along with a group of guys working on an electric generator, which for 1865 is pretty good, right? And we also have Mercury, god of commerce, presiding over goods and also the creditors of the Revolutionary War, because you know we're only 100 years as a nation, actually 90 years, and still paying some of those debts off. And that whole scene is being pulled into the scene of Neptune. So these two things, this Neptune scene, which was, you know, going across the ocean and master of the oceans, and commerce. Interesting, right? This whole mashup that's going on. And then we have Vulcan, god of the forge, and he's presiding over the making of cannonballs and barrels. And he's got a steam engine in the back. Then we have Ceres, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, the goddess of agriculture. And she sits on top of a McCormick mechanical reaper, which was one of the forerunner machines to the modern combine harvester. Okay, so there's the history lesson of the apotheosis of Washington. But I promise, we're still at church. We're still in Acts 12. Out of everything I mentioned there, though, well, what's missing in this fresco that is one of the most important works of art in our nation's history and architecture? That's what this fresco is. So who did we leave out of this? Now, before you get squeamish and think I'm about to violate some kind of church and state sentiment or any of that, we already have a man in this painting elevated to a god status, surrounded by Roman gods and goddesses, co-opted to do the bidding of what a man or a group of men aspired for them to do. So I don't think we get to say, oh, we got to separate all this out, because I think that's where we're at here. So who or what is missing? God, Jesus, the Bible, the book in the painting or document that Washington is holding. I thought maybe, just maybe, that's a Bible. But it's not. It's the Constitution, which some folks confuse are one and the same. And we have a rainbow, but it's a nod to Washington's strength because the rainbow arches at his feet. Now, okay, so at first I thought maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, and you may still be thinking that. Fair enough. There are other apotheoses of Washington creations, engravings from the 1800s, some of them very early 1800s. Take a look at these in case there was any question here. Now remember, Washington didn't want to be king. Didn't really want to be much of anything other than I'm here to help out, right? Okay, so now, go ahead and throw that other one up there. Look at that one. Now, you know what that box is? Let me just read the description. Washington rises from his tomb on a heavenly ray of light with the help of figures representing genius and immortality. Not raised by the power of Christ, but raised by figures representing genius and immortality, while faith, hope, and charity look on. America is personified both as Lady Liberty, seated atop armor and holding a staff on whose tip rests a liberty cap, and as a Native American man with braided hair and a headdress, quiver, and tomahawk. Hunched over in mourning and guarding Washington's sarcophagus, they resemble images of sleeping soldiers at Christ's tomb. Anybody else a little squeamish? A little squeamish by all that? It makes me a little squeamish. Okay, so I don't want to delve into the political too far or debate the merits or lack of merit of the church state or any of that. It just seems like what was painted in the rotunda 90 years after the Revolution, or what these carvings were like just a few 15, 20 years after the Revolution, they seem like they reflect a very different mindset or ideology. If you look at documents written by Washington's contemporaries and the reasons for revolt and separation from England, it would seem that the free, because God made us free, mentality or ideology had started to look like something else by 1865. Right? Okay, so back to my ornery questioning of the research. Those primitive people believing in mythology and kooky stuff and emperors and all that kind of stuff, we would never do that today, would we? Turns out we do. Even religious people do this. Now, if 1865 seems too long ago, if those people still seem primitive to you, how about we take a stronger look at this whole distraction by shiny? I want to ask you, have you ever heard of a really popular TV show called American Idol? Some of you may think I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, but at least I hope I'm making a point. You see, getting distracted by shiny really is just idolatry. And it happens on all kinds of scales. Acts 12, let's get back there. Right? I think when we start to figure out how to apply certain passages of Scripture, it's pretty important to see if we find ourselves doing the same things people have been doing since there were people on the earth doing them. And in this case, I think we find it. We find the same kinds of things that were happening right there in Acts 12 in 44 AD in Caesarea Maritima, happening in 1800s, early America, happening in 1865, right up till now. Because those kind of things were also happening in the days of Noah, where people had taken their eye off of God. Or in the time when Moses went up the mountain, and while he's gone, the people, the religious, God's people, the Hebrew people, they convince Aaron into making a golden calf for them to worship. Talk about shiny. This is your God, Israel, that brought you up from the land of Egypt. That's what Aaron told them. Or going way back, the first two most perfect people ever walked with God perfectly in a perfect garden, and they got distracted by a snake and a tree and a fruit. I mean, can people, even religious people, get distracted by shiny? Yeah. Whole groups of people. God says in His Word, in the writings of Isaiah the prophet, Isaiah chapter 42, verse 8, I am the Lord, that is my name. I will not give my glory to another, nor my praise to graven images. Okay, let's put ourselves back in Acts chapter 12. And there's Herod in his silver clothes, and the sun's breaking over the edge of the amphitheater. And he's making his speech, and the people cry out. The sun hits the robes, people cry out, the voice of a God and not of a man. And I think, at least in my head, as I imagine this scene, there's an echo that resounds in heaven that sounds an awful lot like Isaiah 42:8. I am the Lord, that is my name. I will not give my glory to another, nor my praise to graven images. And I believe this to be true, a true and immutable character trait of God. And so every time we run up against something shiny, every time we're distracted from Him and enamored with ourselves or something that gets our attention more than Him, I think heaven echoes with this truth. I am the Lord, that is my name. I will not give my glory to another, nor my praise to graven images. A few years back, I was going through some counseling, really good biblical counseling, with a great friend and mentor, Dave Mikulski. Dave Mikulski was another pastor in our little town of Mitchell, Indiana, but ironically enough, grew up in his early years in Citrus Heights over on Greenback, which is pretty crazy. Anyway, this was a verse that Dave had me memorize, Isaiah 42:8. Because my shiny things, the things that distracted me, were things like approval or the opinions of others. Sometimes my shiny things were even things like Bible study and how much of it I could do. Other times my shiny things were anger or pride or power or influence. All of those things were shiny things that would really get my attention. And Dave really helped me work through all of that with that one verse. Idolatry runs rampant in the intermissions of our lives if we don't remember this. Our mission in the intermission is to avoid distraction by our shiny things. And we have a lot of shiny things. And those shiny things will kill us. Don't get distracted by the shiny. Now, that's not a mean thing that God does. You see, God's glory saves us from ourselves. But if ourselves happens to be our God, it cannot save us. We cannot save us. Only God can. So what are your shiny things? What distracts you from Him? We fill sports stadiums and spend billions on entertainment. Think we're a distracted society? We spend tremendous amount of times on these little, I think I left mine over there, these little computers that we carry in our pockets, these things that were supposed to serve us. They seem to have mastered us just a bit, haven't they? And even this, the word distraction, it comes from the Latin, distractionem. And that word actually literally means pulled apart. You see, we were built to be in union with God. We're designed for that kind of union with God. We're designed to worship Him and Him alone. So distractions pull us apart. It tears up the image of God in us. Okay, back to Acts 12 real quick. Herod dies because of his own distraction, of being distracted by his own wealth, power, influence, and position. And what happens? I love the way Luke just records. Here we go, verse 24. But the word of the Lord continued to grow and to be multiplied. And Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem when they had fulfilled their mission, taking along with them John, who was also called Mark. You see, we know a lot about Herod from the writings of Josephus, but mostly Herod was nothing more than a speed bump in history. Yes, he killed an apostle who no doubt immediately upon the steel taken off his head found himself in the presence of Jesus. So he wasn't complaining. And Herod imprisoned another apostle who was set free by God. You see, whatever it was that Herod was chasing ultimately failed to deliver him. Herod, looking for a grand name for himself, couldn't deliver. Favor with the Jews, couldn't deliver. None of it could deliver. Rubbing elbows with the Roman rich and famous? No. None of the shiny. So while all that's going on, the word of the Lord continues to grow. Continues to grow, because God is continually and actively moving His word, His will, and His ways forward in this world. And distractions, see, God doesn't get distracted from that, but we do. It tears us apart from his mission and what he's doing. And the next thing we'll see in Acts is the expansion of the gospel to the outermost parts of the world, including us. We're still in that mission. So our intermission mission this week, what do we do with our time here and now? Don't get distracted by the shiny. And mostly the stuff around us is all shiny. It can't deliver. Band, come on and back up. We're going to sing our last song. I want us to think about what distracts us. As we get ready to sing this song, what distracts you? I mean, are you like in Fox News all the time? Or CNN, or pick one? I don't care. Is that occupying all of your time, all of your attention? Money? I got to make more money. Was it Rockefeller or Carnegie or one of those really rich guys from way back in the 20s, 30s? They said, "Well, how much is enough?" And he said, "Well, $1 more," or something like that. Like I got to make some more. Entertainment. Anybody distracted by entertainment? Is that your shiny? Money, stuff, entertainment. George Washington, Mercury, Venus, Neptune, our capital. Does that distract you? Our own apotheosis. Think about what the word distraction means. It means pulled apart. What kinds of things do you and I make gods out of? What do you let pull you apart from his image, from his glory, from his salvation? Your only safety, my only safety, our only real salvation, deliverance, and freedom in this entire universe is that God will not share the job of being God with anyone or anything. So our response time this morning is going to be a little bit different maybe. As we start to sing, I actually want you to stay seated for just a moment and let the band start in with this song. And I want us to think about God in all his glory. See if you can get a picture of that, in all of his glory. And then if you can, in your mind's eye, let your shiny things that distract you come into that light, whatever it might be. And I want to ask you, which one shines brighter? As God shines brighter, as the grace and mercy and glory of God outshines your shinies, as you work through that and you're praying to him as they're singing, when God's glory, God's light, all of those things is bigger, then stand up and sing. But if you can't, then let's work through that this morning together. I just want to encourage you to think and take this time to repent and refocus and remember, don't get distracted by the shiny. Let me pray and lead us into this time, and then the band will lead us in this song. God, I pray that you will open our eyes. Even as maybe we have our heads bowed and our eyes closed, I pray that you open the eyes of our hearts to see those things that we would put on a pedestal, on the throne of our lives more than you. For God, you tell us that you are the Lord, and you will not share your glory nor your praise with any idol, any graven image, anything that we would come up with. God, thank you that you do not share the job of being God with anyone or anything. We know that our safety is there, our security is there, our salvation, our deliverance, and our freedom, they're all found in you and not in anything else. Lord, help us to not be so distracted. Help us to not be pulled apart from you by the things that we so easily chase. I thank you for the way that you love us and take care of us in spite of us. Jesus, thank you for the salvation that you won for us on the cross, that you paid for with your own life, and that you raised again so that we too can raise and walk in newness of life. And Holy Spirit, I pray in this time that you work on us and work through us. In Jesus' name, amen.